Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. I'm Anna Heslop and today we're going to be talking about fall armyworm. My guest today is Scott Hardwick from AgResearch, and he's part of the Better Border Biosecurity Research Consortium, and we just call it B3 for quite obvious reasons, which is a team of experts from a range of organisations across New Zealand that are working to understand if and how fall armyworm might affect New Zealand growers. So let's just have a quick refresh. Scott, welcome.
Thank you.
Can you just give us a reminder about what fall armyworm is, how it got here, and how long it's been here?
Okay, these are all really interesting questions. So fall armyworm is a tropical pest of many crops, primarily sweet corn and maize, that probably arrived here under its own steam. So it's a South American pest which has been moving across the globe, and we've ended up in the situation where it's got to Australia, and because it's a member of a group of moths we call noctuids, these are really big, strong flyers, and this guy has most probably flown straight across the Tasman when conditions are ideal. So the first detection was way back March, April, where we first found an egg mass at the port of Tauranga. It was identified as fall armyworm, and then people started saying, well, we've been seeing some strange things lately. And when we went and looked, or when people started looking, we found a whole bunch of fall armyworm, particularly in really late growing volunteer maize. So these are crops which have been harvested, and we ended up in a situation where we got extreme levels of seed loss because of some very dry conditions. So when it was harvested, we got huge numbers of volunteer maize plants coming up, and the weather was nice and moist and warm, and it was ideal conditions for the few fall armyworm that were around to actually build up and to be in quite significant numbers. So as a result of having a look, we didn't find, but MPI found 26 sites across the upper North Island with significant fall armyworm populations.
How likely is fall armyworm to establish in New Zealand?
So there's been some modelling done, funded by B3 and MPI. So there's been some modelling done by AgResearch staff, so that would be Craig Phillips, John Keane and Nick Davies, and it shows that it's very much likely to establish in Northland and some areas in and around the East Cape, some of the warmer areas around Gisborne. So these will be core populations, or likely to be core populations, because we've got to back these up, this modelling up with observations that will seed basically the rest of the populations around New Zealand.
So those populations might become quite permanent, and then based on the season and the weather conditions, they could fan out. So
if we take a step back and we think about other members of this family that are temperate in their distribution, that means they live quite happily in New Zealand. A lot of these species go into what's called diapause in the winter, so as pupae in the ground. But because we're dealing with a tropical species, fall armyworm, it just grows really slowly as the temperatures come down. Now, in areas where you get significant frosts and it gets quite cold over winter, they will not survive that. But as I said, there is this potential in these warmer areas such as Northland and the East Cape that these guys will just slowly but surely go through the winter and then complete their development maybe sometime in spring and then spread out from these sites. Now, these guys are really strong flyers. They can do 1,000 kilometres in a hop if the conditions are right. So if the wind was blowing the right way, you could get individuals from Northland going all the way down to the South Island.
Fabulous. So in the meantime, let's just put that to one side. What's being done right now to confirm whether any of those populations did survive the winter, and when will we know those results?
So at the moment, there is a GIA process with industry partners and MPI. And so what we have been doing is we've been doing quite a bit of modelling to see, one, where it potentially could overwinter, we've been doing some phenological modelling so we can predict how many generations there will be, and it seems that most of New Zealand will be 3 generations, maybe a 4th generation. And then, so that's the modelling component, but then we're trying to match this up with observations from the field. So there are 2 processes going on. One is monitoring of the 26 sites where we know fall armyworm has been present. So we're putting out pheromone traps there, and we're going to be doing some crop scouting, and that's work which is being undertaken between AgResearch and Plant and Food. We've got some partnerships there. And then the other part of the work is industry-based work. So this is being funded through the likes of FAR and Veggies New Zealand and Hort New Zealand and other industry bodies, where growers are going to put out their own traps, and there is going to be coordination of that monitoring. And what I'd like to say is that if we do find it at these sites, it's really important that we carry through this monitoring from spring all the way through to autumn, because if we do that, then we can try to match up our observations with the phenological and the distribution models that have been developed.
Okay, so a couple of things here. Phenological models.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's okay. A big word.
It's a huge word.
Yeah.
And a number of generations. So basically, fall armyworm, depending on the temperature, it will breed and go through generations, pupate, lay eggs, get through faster.
Yeah. So as temperature increases, then you shorten your development time, and we end up in the situation where the generation time becomes compressed, and if it's warm enough, then we can have a 4th generation. And it's likely that 4th generation is where the majority of the damage, particularly to sweet corn and grain maize, that's when that's going to occur late in the year, those crops which are carried through into autumn. So if we're going to see large amounts of damage, that's likely to be when we see that.
So if people are interested in having pheromone traps on their properties or being part of some of this monitoring work, is there anything that they can do, or is it all sort of outside their hands?
No, we would welcome anyone get involved. So they should be contacting, in this case, their FAR representative, and hopefully they'll put them in contact with Ivan Laurie. And if that is the case, we potentially can give them a set of traps, and we would really like all those results coming back. Now, one really important thing we have to point out with fall armyworm is it's still it's still an unwanted organism. So all potential sightings of fall armyworm, or if you collect, moths in a trap, that material all has to go back to MPI. So if you think you've got fall armyworm, it needs to be reported, and you do that by calling the 0800 number for reporting, or you can actually do it online. They've got an online reporting system on the MPSI/Biosecurity New Zealand website. So it's really, I cannot stress how important that is, because that's a legal requirement.
Because it's still part of a biosecurity response.
Yeah. So this organism has not been deemed to be uneradicable just yet. So there's still potentially, if we find that it has really struggled and it hasn't come through the winter well, who knows? But given that we're probably going to get fresh ones from Australia, you can read into what's going on there.
The chances are they are going to fly in on any strong westerly wind.
Potentially, if the populations are big enough and the conditions are exactly right in Australia, these things will get up really quite high, and they'll be just blown straight to New Zealand.
So apart from joining up with some of the monitoring programs via FAR or Processed Vegetables or Hort or whoever else you can get in touch with, what else should growers be doing? Should they be looking anyway? If they haven't found them, as you said, back in the autumn, they were found in 26 sites. Do we assume that's the only places that they are?
I wouldn't make that assumption, because if we have a look at how widespread they are wide, right from the west coast of the northern half of North Island and a broad swathe all the way through, apart from some of those really cold areas where we don't grow too many crops in the central North Island, but all the way through to the east coast. And there is an even smattering of sites all the way around. It's particularly interesting. A lot of sites were picked up in the Waikato, but probably just because of the amount of maize that's grown in that area for silage.
So is the Waikato's not necessarily going to be a brilliant place for them to overwinter?
It would be unlikely that they'd overwinter well in Waikato. We can't rule out some microclimate areas, but overall, it's not going to be a stronghold of fall armyworm.
Okay, so everybody that's growing maize in the North Island, from when? When are these things likely to show up?
That's a really good question. We would predict fairly early on where we start seeing that first generation move. I would be, basically looking at your maize crops from the about the second to fourth true leaf stage. Just keep watching, keep looking, go out and scout. There are excellent scouting guides available via FAR. So get a hold of those. They'll tell you what to look for, how to do it, because there are little wee things around the behaviour of this moth that we've got to be very careful about. Things such as an individual adult will fly up a row of maize laying eggs all the way. So if you only sampled up a row, you might get a completely biased view of how much fall armyworm is in your crop. You need to look at the guides and follow those quite carefully. Must say that this thing is not just going to attack maize and sweet corn. It's got a huge host range. What is most likely is that it starts off on maize and sweet corn, but if that food source starts running out, it will then move on to a wide range of other things. It's really interesting to note, in the autumn, we got some significant attack, was being observed on annual ryegrass. And that was basically a case of lots of fall armyworm, no more host because the maize was all gone, and they just moved on to the grass in this situation.
So, growers, this is the message to you. Keep an eye on your crops. Don't just walk down one row. If you see anything and you're not sure if it's fall armyworm or normal armyworm or any other kind of worm, insect, pupae, caterpillar, moth, whatever you want to call it, if you're not sure what it is, report it to MPI, or you can report it to us here at FAR, but generally it just takes a step out of the process if you go through the official reporting. It is still an invasive pest, so you are actually legally obliged to report it, but that's really not the point. The point is we need to know where it is so that we can figure out how far it's spread and how to control it. So thank you, Scott. Maybe we'll do a catch-up again once those results are through later in the year.
Yeah, so we would expect to be able to, after talking to MPI and developing a strategy for releasing of results, being able to do something, I'd hope, before Christmas once we start seeing this thing move around the country. One thing for your growers, if you see any large caterpillars sitting in the whorl of your plant, that's a very strong indication. It's a behavioural indication that this is fall armyworm. Basically, it's not a behaviour that we see from other Spodoptera species. So when I use another big word, Spodoptera is just basically a group of a genus or a group of moths. No other Spodoptera, which fall armyworm are, show that behaviour usually in maize. So it's a really strong indicator.
Okay, so people, keep your eyes out, and in the meantime, have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.